I'll never forget the coldness in his eyes, the way my father looked at me when the judge called my case. It felt like the air in the courtroom had gone still, heavy with the weight of what was to come. My heart pounded in my chest, and every sound seemed muffled, distant, until his voice broke the silence. "I'll take everything from you," he said, his voice low and venomous. The words hit like a slap in the face, and I felt my entire world crumble. I had spent the last year fighting to keep what was mine, but now, sitting in that courtroom, it felt like I was losing everything. My father, the man who had once been my hero, had turned into my worst enemy. I had known it wouldn't be easy. The divorce had torn our family apart, and now, this battle over the family business, the house, everything we had ever built, it was more than just property. It was my identity. It was my father's legacy, and I was the last person left standing to defend it. The courtroom was full of tension. The air felt thick with the bitterness of past grudges, of betrayals that had long festered beneath the surface. My mother, sitting behind me, could barely contain her tears, and my brother, who had stayed silent for most of the proceedings, was now standing up, shaking his head, as though trying to tell me something with his eyes. But I didn't have the strength to look at him. I didn't have the strength for any of it. The judge glanced at both of us, my father and me, before turning to my lawyer, who was sitting next to me. He was a quiet, reserved man, but I knew that behind his calm demeanor he was calculating every move, analyzing every word. I had hired him because I believed in his ability to fight. But now, even as my father made his ruthless threat, I wasn't sure if anyone could help me. I sat there, frozen in place, as the weight of my father's words sank deeper. It felt like a declaration of war, but I knew that I couldn't just give up. I had come this far. There had to be more to this story, something that would change everything. That's when my lawyer stood up. He wasn't tall or imposing, but there was something about him that commanded attention. When he addressed the court, his voice was calm but firm. "Your Honor," he began, "I believe we have a surprise for the plaintiff." I could see my father's face tighten, but I wasn't prepared for what would happen next. My lawyer dropped the bombshell. "After reviewing the documents, we've discovered that Mr. Blake here," he gestured toward my father, "has been concealing assets for years. And we have proof." The courtroom erupted into murmurs, and I felt my breath catch in my throat. My father's expression flickered, something I had never seen before: panic. I had expected everything from him, but not this, not the fear in his eyes. It didn't make sense. My father had always been the one in control. He had taught me how to be strong, how to fight for what I wanted. But now, he was the one who seemed to be losing everything. I turned to my lawyer, and he gave me a reassuring nod, as though he knew this was the turning point. I couldn't believe what was happening. For years I had watched my father manipulate situations to his advantage, never once thinking he would fall. But now, in front of everyone, he was crumbling. And it felt like the universe was finally giving me a chance to take back what was mine. But I couldn't celebrate yet. Not until I knew the full extent of what had just been uncovered. The shock of the moment was overwhelming, and as the courtroom settled into chaos around me, I sat there, my mind racing. What had he hidden? How had he gotten away with it all this time, and what would happen next? The judge banged his gavel, calling for order in the courtroom, but the chaos that followed felt like a tidal wave crashing over me. Whispers filled the room, each one more incredulous than the last. I could barely keep my composure as my lawyer presented the evidence. I looked at my father. His face had gone pale. The arrogance that had once been a part of him was completely gone, replaced by something I had never seen before: fear. My mind raced as I tried to process what had just happened. The documents my lawyer had found, those hidden assets. What did it mean for me? For my family? My father's lawyer was scrambling. he muttered under his breath, casting quick glances at my father, who now sat with his hands tightly clasped together, his knuckles white. I could see his jaw clenched, his teeth grinding with the pressure. It was like watching a man trying to hold on to the last thread of a rope, knowing that the end was coming. My lawyer, cool and collected, stood beside me. He looked down at the pile of papers that had been placed before the judge. These documents, he continued, were submitted to us through a whistleblower who worked within Mr. Blake's company. The financial records were tampered with, significant assets moved offshore to secret accounts in other countries. This isn't just a case of hidden wealth. This is fraud. The words hung in the air like a thick fog. Fraud. The sound of it was a thunderclap in my ears. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My father, the man who had built our family's empire from the ground up, was a criminal. And here I was, sitting in the very courtroom where he had always ruled with an iron fist, now watching as his empire crumbled. The room fell into stunned silence, only broken by the soft murmurs of people trying to process the revelation. My father's lawyer jumped to his feet, shaking his head. "Objection, Your Honor. This is nothing but hearsay, without any substantial proof to back up these accusations." The judge, an elderly man with glasses perched on the end of his nose, looked over at my father's lawyer, then back at the documents on the table. "I'm going to allow this evidence to stand, Counselor," he said, his voice stern. "We'll move forward with a review." I felt a rush of adrenaline flood my system. My father had always been the one to control the narrative. He had always been the one in charge. And now, as the walls of his carefully built world started to crumble around him, I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. For years I had lived in his shadow, obeyed his rules, and let him dictate every aspect of my life. But now, for the first time, it wasn't just about me. It wasn't just about his threats anymore. The courtroom was still, but inside, my heart was racing. This was my moment. This was my chance to take control. "I think it's clear, Your Honor," my lawyer continued, "that Mr. Blake's actions not only violated the law, but also betrayed the trust of his family, his business partners, and his employees. The consequences of these actions are far-reaching." I looked at my father, whose gaze was now focused on the ground. His shoulders were hunched, his breathing shallow. I could see his mind working, calculating, trying to figure out how to get out of this. But it was too late. There was no escape now. I will be calling for a full investigation into these matters, and based on the evidence we have, I believe that the plaintiff, my client, should be entitled to a significant portion of the estate, my lawyer said. My father's face twisted with rage, and for a split second I thought he might shout or lash out. But instead, he sat there, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He looked like a man who had been caught in a lie so big that it threatened to swallow him whole. "You're going to regret this," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper, yet filled with venom. "You think this will end in your favor? You think you can walk away with everything?" But my lawyer remained unfazed, his eyes locked onto my father's. "This isn't about revenge. It's about justice. For your son." The words stung like a slap. My father's gaze darted to me for the briefest moment before he turned away, unable to face me. The room felt like it was spinning, and I fought to keep my focus, to keep my emotions in check. I had thought I knew everything there was to know about my father. I had thought I understood the depths of his manipulations, his ability to control, to twist situations to his favor. But this was something else. He had crossed a line that even I hadn't expected him to cross. The judge cleared his throat, signaling for the court to calm down. "We will reconvene after lunch. I expect both parties to be ready for the next phase of proceedings." As the gavel came down, I felt a strange mix of emotions. There was relief, yes, but there was also something else. An anger so deep it burned. I had been betrayed, not just by my father, but by the life I had once believed in. I had spent so much of my life trying to please him, trying to prove that I was worthy of his approval. But now, I knew the truth. There was nothing left to prove. As the courtroom emptied out, I stood up, my hands trembling. My lawyer gave me a brief nod before walking toward the door, but before I could leave, I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was my brother. His face was pale, his expression unreadable, and he leaned in close. "You have to be careful," he whispered. "This is just the beginning." I didn't answer him. Instead, I walked out of the courtroom, my father's words echoing in my mind. "I'll take everything from you." But now I realized something. He had already taken everything, and I had nothing left to lose. The drive home felt like an eternity. The car's engine hummed in the background, but all I could hear was the pounding of my heart. My mind kept replaying the courtroom scene, my father's words, his trembling hands, and that fleeting moment of vulnerability that had revealed something I never thought I'd see. My father was a man who had always worn his control like a suit of armor, but today, that armor had cracked. And I couldn't stop wondering, what would happen now? As I walked through the front door of my family's mansion, it felt like stepping into a foreign land. The walls that had once seemed like a source of comfort now seemed cold and hollow. The familiar scent of leather and mahogany lingered in the air, but it only served to remind me of the life I had once known. The life that was slipping away from me like sand through my fingers. The house, with its grand staircase and antique furniture, had once felt like home. Now it felt like a cage. I went to my study, the place where my father and I used to discuss business deals, plan our future. I used to sit in that chair, proud to be by his side, to have his approval. But now it felt like an empty throne, one that I had no desire to sit on anymore. I couldn't believe how quickly everything had spiraled out of control. As I sank into the chair, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen, and it was a message from my lawyer. "We need to meet tomorrow. Urgent." I stared at the message for a moment, my mind racing. What now? What more could there be? After everything that had happened in court, the thought of what else might be lurking in the shadows made me uneasy. But I knew I couldn't put it off. Not now. The next morning, I met my lawyer at a small, discreet cafe. As I walked in, I spotted him sitting in the corner, his usual calm demeanor now replaced with something else, something sharper, more focused. "Good morning," I said, sitting down across from him. He didn't waste any time. "I've received more information," he said, his voice low. "We've uncovered something bigger than we expected. Something that could change everything." I leaned in, my heart skipping a beat. "What do you mean?" "There are more hidden assets," he said, his eyes scanning the room as if to make sure no one was listening. "But there's something else. A will, a secret one your father had drafted years ago. And it's not what you think." I felt the color drain from my face. A secret will? My father had always been meticulous about his affairs. He had never left any room for doubt about his intentions. But a secret will? That was something else entirely. I shook my head. "What do you mean it's not what I think?" He leaned back in his chair and looked me in the eye. "It's a will that was never filed. A will that leaves everything to someone else, someone you wouldn't expect." I felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. "Who?" My lawyer hesitated before answering. "Your brother." The words hit like a punch to the stomach. I could barely breathe as I tried to process what he had just said. My brother? The same brother who had been so quiet during the trial, the one who had kept to the background while my father and I fought it out, the one who had always seemed so disconnected from the family business? How could he? I whispered, disbelief washing over me. He's never been involved in the company. He's never cared about any of this. My lawyer sighed. It's not about the company. It's about something much bigger. Your father made sure your brother was set up to inherit everything. He's the one who will get the estate, the business, the house, everything. I couldn't wrap my mind around it. My father had always played by his own rules, but this felt like a betrayal on a whole new level. I had spent my entire life believing that I would take over, that I would be the one to carry on his legacy. But now, the truth was staring me in the face. My father had planned for my brother to be the heir, not me. I tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. My mouth was dry, and I could feel the weight of everything crashing down on me. It was as if the ground beneath me had completely fallen away, and I was left with nothing but the harsh, cold reality of my father's betrayal. "How do we stop this?" I asked, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and fear. "We don't stop it," my lawyer said softly. "We have to use this information to our advantage. If we can prove that your father was hiding assets and that this secret will is part of a larger scheme, we can challenge it. But it's going to be a long, difficult fight." I nodded, barely able to process his words. A long, difficult fight. That's what I had ahead of me. But I was determined. This wasn't just about money or power anymore. This was about everything my father had ever promised me, everything I had worked for, everything I had believed in. And I wasn't going to let it slip away without a fight. I left the calf with a fire burning inside me. I didn't know how I was going to take on this new challenge, but I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to let my father's betrayal define me. I wasn't going to let my brother take everything without a fight. I would expose the truth, no matter how much it cost me. As I walked out onto the street, I looked up at the sky, the clouds swirling above me. There was something symbolic about it, the way the storm was gathering. It felt like the calm before the storm. And I had no idea just how much this battle would change everything. The days after that meeting felt like a blur. I barely slept, barely ate, consumed by the weight of everything that had come crashing down. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see the image of my father, sitting in that courtroom, his face pale and defeated as his carefully constructed world began to crumble. But that image quickly morphed into a new one, the face of my brother, the one who had been handed everything I thought I deserved. The hidden will, the offshore accounts, the years of manipulation, it all seemed to paint a clear picture. My father had always been about control, about making sure everything fell into place exactly the way he wanted. But what I hadn't realized, until now, was that I had never been the one he trusted with the legacy. All those years I had spent fighting for his approval, he had never seen me as his true heir. Instead, he had left it all to my brother, the one who had distanced himself from the family business, the one who had always stayed out of the spotlight. It was like a sick joke, a cruel twist of fate that had me questioning everything I thought I knew about my family. But now wasn't the time for questions. Now was the time for action. I sat in my office, staring at the piles of documents in front of me. My lawyer had sent over every shred of information we had uncovered: the secret will, the financial records, the offshore accounts. It was all there, the proof of my father's betrayal. But the more I dug into it, the more I realized something. This wasn't just about a will anymore. This was about an entire empire, an empire that had been built on lies, deceit, and manipulation. I picked up the phone and dialed my brother's number. He hadn't been returning my calls, and I hadn't seen him since the courtroom. I needed answers. I needed to hear his side of the story. When he answered, his voice was guarded. "Hello? Where are you?" I demanded, my frustration boiling over. "Why haven't you been answering my calls? I've been busy," he said, his tone defensive. "I didn't think there was anything to talk about. Are you serious?" I snapped. "You think there's nothing to talk about? You think I'm just going to sit back and let you take everything?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "It's not what you think," he finally said, his voice softer now. "I didn't want any of this. I never asked for it." "You never asked for it?" I repeated, incredulous. "You've been handed everything, and now you're telling me you didn't ask for it?" "I didn't know about the will," he said quietly. "I didn't know about any of it. Dad, he made sure I was kept out of it." His words stopped me in my tracks. "What do you mean? What are you saying?" "I didn't know that I was going to inherit anything," he explained. Dad kept me in the dark. I wasn't involved in the business. He didn't trust me with any of it. I was always the outsider, the one who didn't fit into his plans. I could hear the frustration in his voice now, the crack in his calm facade. I've been living in his shadow my whole life, trying to figure out what he wanted from me. But he never saw me the way he saw you. He never expected me to take over the business. I was silent for a moment, processing his words. Could it be true? Had my father truly kept my brother in the dark about everything? Had he manipulated him just as much as he had manipulated me? I didn't know what to believe anymore. But I knew one thing for sure: the fight for the family's legacy was far from over. "Look, we need to talk about this," I said, my voice suddenly calmer. "We need to figure this out. There's a lot we don't know, and we need to make sure that the truth comes out." "Yeah," he replied, "I agree. Let's meet." We agreed to meet the next day at a neutral location, away from the chaos of our family home, away from the legal battles. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I knew one thing: things were about to get even more complicated. The next day, I walked into the small cafe where we had arranged to meet. My brother was already there, sitting at a corner table. He looked different, more tired, more worn out. He had always been the calm one, the one who didn't let anything shake him, but today his usual confidence was gone. "Hey," I said, sliding into the seat across from him. "Hey," he replied, his eyes meeting mine for the first time in what felt like forever. We sat in silence for a moment, both of us unsure of where to start. Finally, I spoke. "Tell me everything," I said. "Tell me about the will, about Dad, about everything." He took a deep breath, his eyes narrowing as he searched for the right words. "Dad, he had his plans, but I wasn't part of them. I never was. He never saw me as the heir, not like you. He had a different plan for me, one that didn't involve any of this." I stared at him, trying to piece together the fragments of his story. "So, what? You're telling me you had no idea that you were going to inherit everything?" "Exactly," he said, his voice almost desperate now. "I didn't want any of it. But after Dad's health started failing, he started talking more about the future. And that's when I found out." "But why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "Why didn't you come to me?" "I didn't know what to do," he said. "I didn't know how to tell you. And to be honest, I didn't want this to happen. I didn't want to be in the middle of Dad's mess." I leaned back in my chair, trying to digest what he was saying. Could it be true? Had my brother really been as much of a pawn in this game as I had been? I didn't know anymore, but I did know one thing. The battle wasn't over yet, and the next move would be mine. The days after my conversation with my brother felt like a whirlwind. My mind was reeling, trying to reconcile everything he had said. The pieces were slowly coming together, but they didn't fit the way I had expected. My father's manipulations, my brother's apparent ignorance about the family's plans, and my own role in all of this. It was a tangled mess of lies, betrayals, and secrets. But as the dust settled, one thing became clear: I wasn't the only one in this fight. My brother, despite his initial reluctance, had become an unexpected ally. He didn't want the legacy my father had planned for him, but that didn't mean he was going to let me be the only one to bear the burden of exposing the truth. Together, we were going to take on the empire our father had built and tear it down if necessary. The first step was to meet with our lawyer. It was clear that the information we had uncovered was only the beginning. We needed to dig deeper, find more evidence, and make sure we were prepared for what would come next. I met with my brother the following day, and we drove together to our lawyer's office. He was already waiting for us when we arrived, sitting behind a large wooden desk cluttered with papers. His demeanor was serious, more so than I had seen before. "We've made progress," he began, his voice low and steady. "But there's still much to be done. The will, the offshore accounts, those are just pieces of a much larger puzzle. We have to keep digging." "Where do we go from here?" I asked, feeling a sense of urgency. The longer we waited, the more time my father had to cover his tracks. "I've been in contact with a forensic accountant," the lawyer said, his eyes narrowing. "They'll be able to trace every asset your father has hidden, and we need to find out who else might be involved in this. It's possible that this goes beyond just your family. Your father may have had business dealings with people who are now trying to cover their own tracks." I nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. My father's empire wasn't just about money. It was about power. Political, financial, and personal. Whoever was involved in this would stop at nothing to protect their interests. As the meeting progressed, my brother spoke up for the first time. "If we do this, we need to be ready for the fallout. Dad's not going to take this lying down. He'll fight back. And he won't play fair." I could hear the hesitation in his voice, but I knew he was right. My father was ruthless, and if there was one thing I knew about him, it was that he would do whatever it took to protect his legacy. "We've already started," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "We can't back down now." The lawyer gave a nod of approval. "Good. We'll need everything. Every scrap of evidence, every document, every transaction. This is going to take time, but we'll get it." And with that, the battle lines were drawn. The truth was out there, and we were going to find it. But as we walked out of the office, my brother's phone rang. I glanced at him, and he immediately stiffened, his hand instinctively reaching for the phone. "It's Dad," he muttered under his breath. "I'll take it outside." I watched him walk away, his footsteps echoing down the hallway. For a moment I stood there alone, wondering what my father could possibly want now. What new move was he planning in this game we had found ourselves in? When my brother returned a few minutes later, his face was grim. "Dad wants to meet," he said, his voice tight. "He says he has something to tell us. Something about the will." My stomach twisted. The last time we had been face to face with my father, he had threatened me, vowing to take everything from me. What could he possibly have to say now? "I don't trust him," I said, my voice low. "But we don't have a choice. We need to hear what he has to say." "I agree," my brother replied, his eyes dark with suspicion. "But this isn't going to be easy." We arranged to meet my father the next day, at his private office in the city. The location itself was enough to send a chill down my spine. It was the place where all of his most important decisions were made, where the fate of the family business had been sealed long before I even knew what was happening. Now, it felt like a place of danger, of secrets too dark to be uncovered. The next morning we arrived at his office, the familiar coldness of the building wrapping around us like a cloak. My brother and I exchanged a glance before stepping into the elevator. It moved slowly, the hum of the machinery the only sound between us. When the doors opened, we were led into my father's office. The room was just as I remembered, sleek, modern, and sterile. But this time it felt different. It felt like a battlefield. And standing behind the polished desk, my father looked every bit the king of this empire, his empire, except now there was something different about him. The confidence was gone, replaced with something else. A desperation, perhaps. A man who knew his time was running out. "I've been waiting for you," he said, his voice quiet but sharp. "You wanted to talk," I said, keeping my tone as steady as I could. "So, talk." He motioned for us to sit, and reluctantly we obeyed. My father sat down across from us, folding his hands in front of him as though preparing for a negotiation. "I know what you're doing," he said, his eyes narrowing. "I know you're trying to take everything from me. But let me be clear. I will not let that happen. No matter what." His words were calculated, deliberate. He was trying to maintain control. But this time, it was different. He wasn't the one in power anymore. "You don't get to decide that," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "You lost the right to control this family a long time ago. And now, we're going to make sure the truth comes out." He leaned forward, his eyes dark with anger. "You think you can beat me? You think you can win this fight?" I met his gaze without flinching. "I'm not trying to beat you. I'm trying to expose the truth." The silence between us stretched, thick with tension. My father's eyes flickered, just for a moment, but it was enough. For the first time, I saw something close to fear in them. And for the first time, I realized this battle was not just about money or power. It was about everything: our legacy, our family's future, and the truth that could finally set us free. The tension in my father's office was palpable, suffocating even. My brother and I sat across from him, the space between us growing ever more strained. I could feel the weight of everything, years of manipulation, secrets, and deceit coming to a head. The man who had once been my idol, my mentor, was now the very person I had to fight against. But this time, I wasn't going to back down. "You don't get to control this anymore," I said, my voice resolute, despite the storm raging inside me. "This isn't just about taking your empire, it's about setting things right." My father's expression twisted, his lips curling into a tight, angry smile. "Right? You think you've somehow figured out a way to make things right? You've never understood the way the world works. You think you can tear everything down and start over. But you're wrong." He leaned forward, his cold eyes fixed on me, as though he were sizing me up for some kind of final blow. "You think you've uncovered all my secrets, but you haven't even scratched the surface. The will, the offshore accounts, you don't know the half of it." I felt a chill crawl up my spine as he spoke, the words hanging in the air like a threat. For the first time, I wasn't sure if we had prepared enough for the storm he was about to unleash, but I couldn't show him any fear. I had come too far. "I'm not afraid of you," I said, my voice steady. "You've spent years building this empire on lies, and I'm going to make sure the truth comes out. You won't control us any longer." My father stood up suddenly, his chair scraping against the floor, and for a moment I thought he might lash out physically. But he didn't. He just paced, his hands shaking, his breath shallow. "You think you've won," he said, his voice low and bitter. "You think you can just destroy everything I've worked for. But you don't understand. There's nothing left for you to take." I exchanged a quick glance with my brother, but he remained silent, watching our father with a mixture of confusion and anger. He had never seen our father like this, so vulnerable, so unhinged. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice rising despite myself. "You've spent your whole life making us believe that this was all for us. But it was never about us, was it? It was about you. About keeping us under your thumb." My father turned, his face contorted with rage, his eyes wild. "You think I did this for myself? You think this was all about my power? You don't know anything about sacrifice. You don't understand what it takes to build something from nothing." I stood up, my own anger rising now. "I understand perfectly well what it takes to build something. It takes honesty, integrity, and respect for the people who support you. But you built your empire on lies, on deceit, and now you're going to pay for it. Enough." My father snapped. "You don't know what you're up against. This fight isn't over. You think you've won just because you have a few documents? A few revelations? The real battle is still ahead. I'm not done yet." The cold realization hit me like a punch to the gut. He wasn't just threatening me, he was preparing for a final, desperate move. Whatever we had uncovered, however damning it wasn't going to be enough to stop him. I felt a wave of uncertainty wash over me. My father had always been a master at playing the long game. What if there was more? What if we were only seeing a fraction of the truth? I glanced at my brother, who still looked uncertain, but his eyes were now filled with resolve. He had come into this meeting expecting one thing: a confrontation, a final standoff. But now it was becoming clear this wasn't going to be as simple as taking my father down. There were forces at play that we didn't fully understand. "We're not backing down," I said firmly, my voice cutting through the tension. "You've had your time. Now it's ours." My father's eyes flashed with something, anger, defiance, but also something else, something I couldn't quite place. It was as if he were on the verge of giving up, yet unwilling to let go. He turned away from us, pacing again, his fists clenched at his sides. I knew he was preparing for something. "But what? You think you can just take it all away from me?" he asked, his voice dangerously calm. "You think you can just expose everything, tear down the empire I've spent a lifetime building? There are people, forces, things you can't even imagine, who won't let that happen." The cold weight of his words settled on my chest. Was this his final warning? Had we underestimated him all along? He wasn't just a father trying to protect his legacy. He was a man who had built alliances, secret deals and connections that went far beyond anything I had ever imagined. I turned to my brother, feeling the weight of his silence. He met my gaze, and for a brief moment I saw doubt in his eyes. Fear. Maybe. "Are we sure we're ready for this?" he asked, his voice low. I took a deep breath. The truth was, I didn't know. We had uncovered so much, but it still felt like we were standing at the edge of a cliff, unsure of what lay below. "We have no choice," I said finally. "We've come this far. We have to finish this." As the finality of those words settled between us, I heard my father's voice again, cutting through the tension like a knife. "You'll regret this," he said quietly, his eyes dark with threat. "You've already lost." My brother and I stood there in silence for a moment, the weight of what we had started pressing down on us. But I knew one thing for sure. The fight wasn't over yet. And whatever my father had planned, we were going to face it head on. The final showdown had begun, and there would be no turning back.